For centuries, Freemasonry has been organized around a simple yet profound system of degrees, each designed to guide a man's moral and symbolic development. This structure forms the foundation upon which the entire craft is built. The entered apprentice introduces the candidate to the principles of the craft. The fellow craft deepens that journey through learning, labor, and growth. And the Master Mason degree, known as the third degree, stands as the dramatic and philosophical heart of Freemasonry, confronting themes of fidelity, mortality, and renewal. Yet while the first two degrees trace clear roots to medieval operative masonry, the origin of the third degree remains one of Freemasonry's greatest mysteries. Unlike its predecessors, it does not appear fully formed in the earliest records. Instead, it emerged suddenly and dramatically in the early 18th century, bringing with it a powerful legend, new symbols, and a ritual unlike anything that came before it. This abrupt appearance naturally raises important questions. Where did it come from? Why was it created? And what deeper traditions, ideas, and influences shaped its form? These questions have fueled debate among Masonic scholars for generations. Was the third degree an ancient inheritance, preserved in secrecy for generations? Or was it a deliberate innovation, crafted during the birth of modern speculative Freemasonry? Did it draw inspiration from scripture, medieval guild traditions, political upheaval, or even forgotten legends now hidden beneath layers of ritual and symbolism? In this episode of Digital Lodge Number 1, we'll explore the historical evidence, the key figures, and the competing theories behind the origin of the third degree. By separating documented fact from informed speculation, we'll uncover how one ritual came to define the very soul of Freemasonry and why its creation still fascinates Masons and historians alike. But before we begin this journey, don't forget to subscribe. To understand how the third degree emerged, we must first look at the broader reorganization of Freemasonry in the early 18th century. When the first Grand Lodge was formed in 1717, Freemasonry underwent a major transformation. The creation of a central authority allowed traditions to be gathered, compared, and standardized, which in turn led to a period of rapid ritual development and expansion. As of when Anderson's constitutions were published in 1723, the Grand Lodge still only recognized two degrees of Masonry, that of entered apprentice and fellow craft. However, this structure did not remain static for long. Shortly afterward, a third degree of Master appeared, and eventually even another degree, called the Scots Master degree, or what would later be known in England as the Royal Arch. Rather than presenting a new rank or authority, the Royal Arch reveals the completion or restoration of what was lost in the third degree. For this reason, it is traditionally described as an extension or completion of the third degree, not a separate fourth degree. In classical Masonic understanding, especially in England, the third degree is symbolically unfinished without the Royal Arch, which explains and resolves its central mysteries. Thus, the Royal Arch does not supersede the Master Mason degree but fulfills it, forming a single, continuous narrative rather than a higher step beyond it. Turning now to the earliest evidence of the third degree itself, the origins of the third degree, or Master Mason's degree, remain uncertain, but what we do know is that the first recorded instance of it being worked was in 1725, in the Apollonian Society for Lovers of Music and Architecture. This society was composed entirely of Freemasons, although it was not recognized by the newly formed Grand Lodge as a regularly constituted lodge. This situation prompted an investigation by the Grand Lodge and eventually resulted in a cease and desist letter being sent to the society. The group simply replied that they could do what they wanted and ignored the order. Later that same year, the Grand Lodge authorized all lodges to be allowed to work the third degree. Even after the Grand Lodge gave its blessing, however, the degree was still not required. In fact, the vast majority of lodges either could not or chose not to confer the degree well into the 1740s. If a fellow craft wished to be raised to the degree of Master Mason, he often needed to join a separate Master's Lodge. The Grand Lodge did not formally and officially recognize Freemasonry as a three-degree system until Anderson's constitutions were republished in 1738. At the emotional and symbolic heart of the third degree ritual lies the Hiramic Legend. This legend tells the allegorical story of Hiram Abiff, the master craftsman of King Solomon's temple, who remains faithful to his trust even when threatened with death. According to the legend, Hiram is confronted by three ruffians who demand the secrets entrusted only to a master. He refuses to betray his obligation and is struck down, choosing fidelity over self-preservation. His body is later discovered and he is symbolically raised, teaching that integrity, duty, and moral truth are more enduring than life itself. In Freemasonry, the legend is not presented as literal history but as a dramatic moral allegory exploring mortality, faithfulness, and the hope of renewal beyond death. While Hiram Abiff appears in early Masonic sources such as Anderson's Constitutions of 1723, the full legend with its detailed account of his death at the hands of 3 ruffians does not appear in ritualized form until the first exposure of all 3 degrees, Masonry Dissected, was published in 1730. To better understand this development, it is helpful to examine the biblical source material. In the Bible, Hiram, also called Hiram or Hiram Abiff, is presented as a highly skilled master craftsman sent to King Solomon to assist in the construction of the temple in Jerusalem. He is renowned particularly for his expertise in bronze work, engraving, and decorative arts. Scripture describes him as the son of a widow from the tribe of Naphtali, though in another account she is associated with the tribe of Dan, and the son of a man of Tyre, reflecting a mixed Israelite and Phoenician heritage that connected him to 2 great traditions of craftsmanship. Because of his exceptional ability, wisdom, and understanding, Solomon specifically requested Hiram from King Hiram of Tyre to oversee and execute the most complex artistic and structural elements of the temple, including the casting of the great bronze pillars and other sacred furnishings. The title Abi, meaning father or master, is understood as an honorific denoting his status as a master artisan rather than a familial description. Although Hiram is mentioned with respect in both 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles, the biblical account is brief and focuses solely on his professional skill and contribution to the temple, containing no reference to his death or any dramatic narrative. The later and more elaborate story associated with Hiram in Freemasonry, particularly his martyrdom and symbolic significance, does not appear in Scripture and represents a later allegorical development built upon the biblical figure of a supremely faithful and accomplished craftsman. This naturally leads us back to the central question: so where did the 3rd degree actually originate? Some believe it was a ceremony that predated the existence of the Grand Lodge and was only worked by a minority of lodges until 1725, when the Grand Lodge chose to adopt it. If this is the case, then where could it have originated? One persuasive explanation lies in its possible connection to medieval guild mystery plays. These plays were performed by craft guilds throughout England and Europe from the Middle Ages onward and dramatized biblical or legendary stories using symbolic action, dialogue, and stage death and restoration themes. Stonemasons and other operative craftsmen were deeply familiar with this theatrical tradition, which emphasized moral instruction through spectacle rather than abstract teaching. As Freemasonry transitioned from an operative craft to a non-operative fraternity, these dramatic techniques could have been adopted by accepted Masons. The Hiramic Legend functions much like a mystery play performed within a closed, initiatory setting, where the candidate does not merely hear a moral lesson but enacts it. The physical movements, symbolic gestures, and stage confrontation echo the embodied storytelling methods of medieval drama, reinforcing the lesson through experience. This development aligns with the broader 18th century shift toward ritualized moral instruction, particularly among educated elites familiar with allegory, theater, and symbolism. In addition to this, earlier Masonic traditions show that Freemasonry possessed other narratives involving the search for lost knowledge and the recovery of a body before the Hiramic legend became dominant. One of the most important examples is found in the Graham manuscript of 1726, which places a similar secret-seeking story in a very different setting involving Noah and his sons. In this version of the story, the patriarch Noah is presented as a central figure whose secret was sought by his 3 sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth many years after the flood, long before the building of King Solomon's temple. The narrative describes how the 3 sons journeyed to Noah's grave in the hope of discovering something about him that might lead them to the valuable secret he possessed. Based on the belief that all things needful for the new world were in the ark with Noah, finding nothing but his decayed body, they begin to disinter his remains, pulling at his finger end, joint by joint, lifting the corpse, setting foot to foot, knee to knee, breast to breast, cheek to cheek, and hand to back, and cry out, "Help, O Father," as if appealing to the Father of heaven, since their earthly father could no longer help them. After replacing the body, the sons reflect on what they have found. One says, "Here is yet marrow in the bone," another, "but a dry bone," and the third, "It stinketh," and they agree to give it a name known to Freemasonry to this day. Scholars note that elements of this Noah story resemble parts of the later 3rd degree legend, especially the recovery of a body and the search for a lost secret. However, The Graham manuscript places these elements in a much older biblical context involving Noah rather than Hiram Abiff. Unlike the later Hiramic legend, which dramatizes martyrdom and fidelity unto death, the Noah version focuses on ancestral wisdom and the recovery of knowledge. The eventual replacement of these earlier stories with the Hiram narrative suggests a conscious refinement of ritual drama, selecting a figure associated with craftsmanship, integrity, and sacred labor ideals especially suited to a fraternity of builders and moral architects. Beyond literary and ritual evolution, there are also theories suggesting political motivations behind the creation of the legend. Some propose that the drama was invented by early accepted Masons prior to the Grand Lodge era for political reasons. One such theory connects the legend to royalist sentiment following the English Civil War and the execution of King Charles in 1649. Many early Freemasons including Elias Ashmole, Robert Murray, Inigo Jones, and Nicholas Stone were known royalists, and it has been suggested that lodges may have provided discreet meeting spaces during the Cromwellian period. According to this interpretation, the Hiramic legend's portrayal of a faithful figure murdered for refusing to betray his trust could have symbolically echoed the perceived martyrdom of Charles I. While compelling, there is no direct documentary evidence linking the creation of the legend to these political events, and the theory remains speculative. A similar argument has been made regarding Jacobite influence following the Glorious Revolution of 1688, when James II was deposed. Some see the language of martyrdom, loss, and restoration in the legend as symbolically resonant with Jacobite ideology. While such parallels exist, they remain interpretive rather than evidentiary. A more compelling and better supported theory is that the Hiramic legend was developed within the newly formed Premier Grand Lodge of London itself. Central to this view are George Payne and Dr. John Theophilus Desaguliers, both of whom served twice as Grand Masters and were leading figures in Lodge No. 4. Payne provided organizational structure and regulation, while Desaguliers supplied intellectual vision, symbolism, and dramatic flair. As lodge activity expanded, new ritual material was needed to fill meetings, and it is during this period that the third degree likely took shape. Significantly, elements now central to the third degree such as the Mason word and the 5 points of fellowship originally belonged to the fellow craft degree. Their redistribution suggests intentional ritual restructuring, rather than a previously unknown degree suddenly emerging. The genuine secrets of a Master Mason were eventually associated with the Royal Arch, reinforcing its role as the completion of the third degree. The Hiramic legend also appears to align closely with another narrative known to Desaguliers, found in Samuel Lee's Orbis Miraculum. This story describes the discovery of the Gospel of St. John hidden in a vault beneath the ruins of Solomon's Temple. Early Masonic practice reinforces this connection, as obligations were traditionally taken on the Bible open to the Gospel of St. John, whose opening words were understood by many early Masons to allude to the Mason word. It is possible that Desaguliers adapted this narrative framework, replacing the discovery of the Gospel with the recovery of the Mason word, a story that would later form the basis of the Scots Master degree and the Royal Arch ceremony. If so, the Hiramic legend may have been crafted specifically to explain how that word was lost in the first place. Another compelling argument linking Dr. John Theophilus Desaguliers to the creation of the Hiramic legend lies in its striking resemblance to a medieval French tale known as the Song of the Four Sons of Aymon. In this 12th century tale, Renaud de Montauban is one of four noble brothers who, after a life of adventure and crusading, returns home to discover that his wife has died. Renouncing his former life, Renaud sells his possessions and travels to Cologne, where he earns a living as a builder working on a new church. Although not formally trained as a Mason, his workmanship surpasses that of the professional builders, whose jealousy ultimately leads them to murder him and cast his body into the river Rhine. Miraculously, the body does not sink but is raised up and returned to his brothers, who then build a chapel in his honor. The parallels to the Hiramic legend are unmistakable: a supremely skilled builder, slain by jealous companions, and a lifeless body that is later raised. Although born in England, both of Desaguliers' parents were French, educated, and deeply familiar with the literature of their native country, and it is highly probable that Desaguliers was introduced to such Romance literature in his youth. It is important to note that several of the old charges, from the operative build Masons, contain references to a figure described as the son of Hiram, king of Tyre, named Anon or Anon, and who is portrayed as the chief master of geometry in Masonry. One such reference appears in a manuscript dated 1583, which describes this Anon as the principal master craftsman of Solomon's temple, skilled in carving, engraving, and every branch of masonry. This Anon's being the son of Hiram aligns closely with the biblical phrase Hiram Abiff, which means Hiram is my father, as found in 2 Chronicles 13, which describes Hiram Abiff as a master craftsman of exceptional ability. The similarity between the names Anon and Ammon could have triggered Desaguliers' thoughts toward the 4 sons of Ammon story he had known since childhood. From there, he may have drawn upon its themes and imagery while shaping the Hiramic legend then taking form within the 3rd degree. The 3rd degree of Freemasonry did not simply appear fully formed from antiquity. It emerged at a specific moment in history, shaped by new ideas, older traditions, in the minds of those seeking to give deeper meaning to the craft. Whether drawn from biblical symbolism, medieval guild practices, political memory, or carefully constructed allegory, the 3rd degree represents a turning point where Freemasonry moved beyond instruction and into transformation. What makes its origin so compelling is not just the question of who created it, but why. The ritual speaks to universal human concerns, loyalty under trial, the reality of mortality, and the hope that something greater endures beyond loss. That message, once experienced, continues to resonate across cultures, centuries, and lodges around the world. If this exploration has raised new questions or challenged long-held assumptions, then it has done its work. Freemasonry was never meant to provide easy answers, but to encourage reflection, study, and personal discovery. Thank you for joining me on Digital Lodge number 1. If you found this episode valuable, consider subscribing, sharing it with a brother, or continuing the discussion in the comments below. Until next time, keep seeking light and remember that the journey is just as important as the destination.